The world is all about creativity right now, and that's what we're doing with these multi-purpose recipes today. So get ready, we're getting creative. So our first recipe is easy emergency bread. The nice thing about it is there's no kneading, there's, a little bit of kneading, but there is no resting. And you don't need yeast for this recipe. And chances are you've got all these ingredients in your home right now. So in my bowl, I have 3 1/3 cups of flour. It's just your standard all-purpose flour. And then to it, I'm going to add what's gonna help our bread rise. And that's 2 teaspoons of baking powder. Now you can see something called baking powder in the store. You can see something called baking soda. For sure, go with the baking powder this time. If you go with baking soda, you're going to end up having kind of a metallic taste in your bread. So I'm gonna whisk that in, and then to that I'm gonna add 1 teaspoon of salt as well. And we've already got 3 of our ingredients into our bread. Behind me, my oven is already preheated at 375, and now I'm going to add 10 ounces of milk into my flour, baking powder, and salt combination. And the reason I have my stove already preheating is obviously we want it ready when it comes to making our bread time. So I've already got my pan that I'm gonna cook my bread on in the oven. Oh gracious. I just have made a clumpy mess. I was so busy talking to you, I wasn't even thinking this through. This is one of those things where you'll notice if you put a whisk into the bowl, you're gonna end up with just this goopy situation. So when it comes to making this bread, you could simply combine your ingredients together with a fork, or you could just use your hands right off the bat and save yourself some dishes time. I'm just gonna come in with my hands and I'm gonna keep folding, and I wanna combine this all together into one big dough ball. And sometimes, you may have heard this before, they talk about getting a shaggy dough. You can see right here all of these little threads of dough that are kind of connected but kind of not. That's where that shaggy dough phase is. But we want to get this all combined. Now it's a little difficult to do this inside of your bowl till the very end. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn this all out onto my work surface. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to work this together into a ball. If it gets a little too dry, what you can do is you can add a little bit more milk to it. But you can see I'm just kind of scooping and folding and bringing this together. I'm just gonna get all those little loose pieces. Now if you notice, I didn't have to flour my surface for this. It's doing its job on its own. Now, you may have heard that phrase before, soda bread, and that's technically what this is because you don't have any yeast in there. So I've got this nice ball right here. So I'm gonna grab my pan out of the oven. This is much too dense and tight where the outside of my bread would get very burnt by the time the inside was done. So I'm gonna take the palm of my hand and I'm gonna work on smushing this out, and I want it to be about 1.5 inches to 2 inches thick. You don't need to worry about making it into any fancy rectangular shape because we're just gonna put it on this big sheet pan. Now the nice thing about this bread is you can, once it's baked, turn it into a sandwich. You can slice it up and turn it into French toast. If it gets too dried out because you don't use it fast enough, you can cube it up, you can roll it in some olive oil, and now you've got a really nice crouton if you bake that off in the oven until it's nice and crispy. But this is all it is. It's my loaf of bread. I'm gonna put it onto my pan right here. So my last step, now that it's on my pan, is to take just a regular old kitchen knife, and I'm gonna put a big X on the top. If I don't do this, this is gonna get all of that delicious bready steam stuck inside, and my loaf is actually gonna go in my oven. So I've got my X on the top. We're ready for 35 minutes in the oven, and then we've got a delicious loaf of bread. This second recipe is naan bread, and you might be wondering, what do you even use that for? But it's got a lot of different purposes, and you can see here, not very many ingredients either. So we're gonna start with 1 3/4 cups of flour, and to that I'm gonna add 2 teaspoons of sugar. Then on top of that, 1 teaspoon of salt. And it's another case where we don't have any yeast at all in this bread. So we're gonna add 3/4 of a teaspoon of baking powder. Just like last time, remember you've got your baking powder and your baking soda, but we want baking powder for this recipe. So I've got all of my dry ingredients mixed together, and now I'm gonna bring in my wet ingredients. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make a well in my bowl. So that means I'm gonna push up my ingredients more on the sides so that it doesn't get clumpy. And in the middle of that, I'm gonna add 2 teaspoons of oil. I've got 2 teaspoons of vegetable oil here. This is a case where you wanna stick with more of a mild oil. If you go with olive oil, it could change the flavor a little bit. And then the last thing I'm gonna add is a 1/2 cup of milk. And now I'm just gonna use my hands and I'm gonna combine this together by coming from the edge of the well and mixing into the inside of the flour. So it's gonna start out really wet, but once I've made my way around the well and I've started incorporating my oil and my milk, I can go and start squeezing it more together. Now I said naan bread, and that might be a bread that you're not overly familiar with. With naan bread, it kind of is similar to a flatbread. But if you're thinking about how do you eat it, there's a lot of different ways that you can eat this bread, because remember, we're getting creative with all of these recipes. What we're thinking about when it comes to using this is you could have it in the morning if you heated it up. You could do something simple, almost like a toast option where you could put it into your oven and toast it. But you can also use it for pizza crust. I'm gonna talk a little bit more about that later. And it works great for grilled cheese sandwiches. It works really nice for paninis. You've got a lot of options here. So I've got the majority of my ingredients all combined together. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna turn it out onto my countertop, because there is a little bit of time that needs to be put in with this when it comes to kneading and when it comes to resting. So what I need to do is I need to work on kneading this together for a full 5 minutes. So if you're a person that has a kitchen timer, you might want to set that timer, because it might feel a little bit long if you're not used to kneading bread. So notice I'm just coming from the back, pushing with the heel of my hand, and I'm starting to knead this together. And what that's gonna do is it's gonna combine all of my ingredients together, and I'm gonna get a really nice dough for this. So I'm gonna knead this for 5 minutes, then I'm gonna let it rest for 10, and then we'll start cooking this bread. So my dough has been sitting here for 10 minutes resting, and what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna take a knife and I'm gonna cut this into 4 pieces, because today what I'm gonna do with this is I'm gonna turn it into a pizza dough, where I'm gonna make little personal pan pizzas. So I've got it cut into quarters, and now I'm just gonna kinda tuck this all together to get a nice dough ball again. And I'm gonna bring my rolling pin into play, and I'm gonna roll this out to make my pizza crust. Now this is gonna make a thin crust pizza, and you can kind of tag team. I've got guides on top of my rolling pin, so look, I'm not even moving it. I'm not even peeling it off my rolling pin. It doesn't matter, but my rolling pin has guides on it that are 1/4 inch, so it helps me get started. But then I'm gonna use the palm of my hand again, and I'm gonna start stretching this out. You can actually pick it up and pinch it, and also let gravity help you, where if you squeeze this out to the edges, you'll see it starting to get bigger and bigger and bigger. I wanna get this all the way down to 1/8 of an inch. All right, so what I've got here is I've got my bread all rolled out to about 1/8 of an inch thickness. Now, one thing to keep in mind with this is this bread isn't really going to expand. So what I've got here is I've got my little personal pizza, and now I'm ready to start cooking up my dough. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set my frying pan. There's nothing in it because I have a nonstick pan. If you don't have a nonstick pan, then you're gonna wanna put some butter, some oil, whatever you're comfortable using. But I'm gonna put this on medium-high heat, and I'm gonna get my pan preheated, and then I'm gonna cook this each side for about 90 seconds just in my dry pan. So we're just finishing up. Perfect. Our 4th piece of naan bread, and I've got 4 here. So now I could, if I wanted to, take some butter and mix in some different herbs or some garlic, and I could spread that over the top and I could eat it as like a side item. It's great if you're having a pot of spaghetti. Or what I could do is I could cut it into pieces, turn it into sandwiches, but this is getting turned into pizza tonight at my house. So all I would need to do is, since the dough is pretty much cooked already, well actually it is already cooked, I just need to put on my pizza sauce, my toppings, my cheese, and then I can pop it in a 350-degree oven until the cheese melts, and then I've got an easy homemade pizza. What's awesome about these too is if you wanted to, you could double, triple, quadruple this batch, spend a day making them, and you can wrap them up in tin foil and you can keep them in your freezer for up to 3 months. So we've got 2 breads down, let's check out our third. So our final recipe is a bread that you can use with main dishes or for desserts. So it's fantastic. It's another creative multi-purpose bread. So we've gotten here 1 cup of flour, and to that I'm gonna add 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder. So notice none of our recipes today used yeast. And then I've got a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And I'm just gonna use my hand again, and I'm going to mix that together. And I'm going to add 1/2 cup of milk, and that's what's going to bring all of our ingredients together. That's our liquid that's going to bind it all. So just like last time when we made a well, I'm going to bring the flour around the edge, and I'm just going to turn it in, and I'm going to use my hands, and I'm going to combine this dough together. All right, I've got my dough together, and you can see that it's pretty sticky. And what I want to do is I want to put a generous amount of flour onto my surface because I don't want it to just stick to my counter because that'll make a yucky, yucky mess. And I will put it, bloop, onto my surface. And now what I'm gonna do is sprinkle some flour onto the top. And I'm gonna work it out a little bit here. And it's a really soft dough. You can see when I kind of fold it around. All right, so this I'm going to actually be able to divide into 4 pieces. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna grab my knife and I'm gonna sprinkle some flour on either sides of it. And I'm gonna cut it once, cut it twice, and now I've got my 4 pieces. So I'm gonna take these extra pieces and move it to the side. And now what I wanna do is, if you want to, you can spread this out with a rolling pin. I'm just gonna use my hand. And I want to get it to about 1/4 inch thick, and you can see it doesn't take very long at all. So now what I'm going to do is, the name of this is fry bread. So I'm going to fry it. So I'm going to get 350 degrees of oil, nice and toasty warm in here. And then what I'm going to do to make sure the middle doesn't pop, I'm going to take my thumb and just press a little bit in the middle so it's a little bit thinner there, because that's where the air usually kind of puffs together. So 350 degree oil, and we're going to slide it in. So I've got my last piece of fry bread coming out of my oil. Remember, I had 1 inch of oil in there, 350 degrees, and I fried each of these for about 1.5 minutes on each side, and they get nice and puffy and golden brown. Once I take them out, I'm gonna put them onto a paper towel to get rid of the extra oil. Now, what's fantastic about these is you can use these as a main dish or as a dessert. When these are still nice and warm, you can sprinkle some sugar and some cinnamon on there, and it almost has that mini donut vibe. You could also, once you get them all mini donutified, I don't know if that's a word, but we're gonna use it. Then you can also put a scoop of ice cream on the top and make a fry bread sundae out of it. If we're talking about main dishes, you can serve taco meat on this and make a delicious fry bread taco, or what I like to do is I'll make up a whole bunch of these. This is just a 4 batch. And then what I'll do is I'll put them in an airtight container. I can put them in a 375 degree oven the next morning, and it's delicious at breakfast with some honey or some jam or even just some melted butter. So we've got 3 very creative, very multi-purpose breads. Let's take a look at all we've done today. Well, it may not be the most colorful, but it does provide us with the most options. And I guess if we're thinking about it, all of these 3 simple dishes on here could give us countless opportunities for flavor. The first thing we made was that easy emergency bread. Only 4 ingredients and you get a nice loaf of bread. If you want to, when it comes right out of the oven, you could brush the top with butter, but I left mine plain because I'm thinking this is perfect for sandwiches. I can't wait to start making pizza out of my naan bread. It's gonna be delicious, it's gonna be amazing, and I even might make some more batches of this and take some homemade pizza to some neighbors to leave on their doorstep. Social distancing at its finest. And then also, this smells delicious. I can't wait to make an ice cream sundae out of this fry bread with some cinnamon and some sugar. So remember, the apron's optional, but the flavor isn't. Just do like a little bloop. That's good.
Milk does a body good.